Welcome to the Juice Consumer Direct podcast. We are really excited for our show that we have today. We're joined by some amazing guests. We're here with Rich Goetz. He is the founder of Goetz Law Group and a close friend of Squeeze. And we're also joined here by the TCPA Czar, Eric Troutman, partner at Troutman Amin, nationally recognized TCPA class action defense lawyer and founder of the TCPA World blog. We are so grateful to both of you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, Eric, thank you. So real quick, why don't we give you both a chance to introduce yourself? Eric, we'll start with you and tell us a little bit about how you got into this world, this niche of TCPA. I'm sure when you started your career, this is where you envisioned you'd end up, right?
In a weird way, yes. And Jacob, thanks for having me. When I was young, I knew or dreamt at least that I would be a Top Gun national litigator that flew across the country trying the biggest cases. And hey, look, sometimes dreams come true, right? So I kind of am exactly where I thought I would be. Did I know that the TCPA was going to be the vehicle? I did not. But look, I mean, I cut my teeth as a trial lawyer. That's why I went to law school. And by the time I was, a young buck at 30 years old, I tried a bunch of cases, and amongst those was a series of fraud trials for Wells Fargo Bank out in Glendale against the Armenian mafia. We did very well, and my exploits came to the attention of some of the higher ups over there at Wells, and when they got a big TCPA class action a couple of years later, they sent it to me, even though I didn't really do complex litigation at that time. And I'll never forget, they told me, look, you're a smart guy. You'll figure it out. And before I knew it, I was their national counsel. And then very quickly, I was national counsel for Ally Bank and US Bank. And really, once I kind of taken over the financial services vertical, it was a pretty easy step for me to kind of broaden out and become the czar of the TCPA. And to date, I've handled over 800 national TCPA class action defenses and thousands of individual suits. I mean, this is what I do. And again, did I expect to do TCPA specifically? No. But when you're talking about multi-billion-dollar complex federal court litigation, sign me up, man. That's what I want to do with my career. So here I am.
I love it. What a niche.
Nice.
I mean, just the opportunity recognized, took advantage, and you were prepared for it. So congratulations. And, I know we're grateful for all the great work that you do to advocate in the industry as well. Rich, talk a little bit about your world.
Very different story than Eric's.
Yeah.
I grew up an NBA fan in Utah. So for me, my dream job was to be the starting point guard for the Utah Jazz. So once that didn't happen, I knew that wherever I ended up, it was not going to be my dream job.
Yep.
So I just kind of fell into, I was knocking doors, selling alarm systems door to door, working my way through college. And I just felt like I was supposed to go to law school. Went to law school. They offered me a job, the same company I'd been selling for. So I ended up being in-house counsel for a sales-centric company. And I kind of
an extremely large sales-centric company.
I started at Pinnacle Security, and then we kind of expanded from the door-to-door compliance to telemarketing compliance. And then I crossed the street and went to Vivint, and Vivint hired me. Basically, they had just been hit with their first class action lawsuit and said, hey, we need someone to come figure this out. Like Eric, they just kind of, I was a little bit versed in it, but I was not an expert in it. And they're like, you'll figure it out. They started sending me to conferences and, PACE conferences. And I got CECP certified and started teaching some of those classes. And I became kind of the TCPA inside expert for Vivint, and then kind of been bouncing around the industry ever since. And so I get to work with Squeeze and some of their issues. But when you get kind of the insider's view, very different view. My job was more on the contract side of how can we, and kind of the oversight side, how do we stay out of court? We don't want to have to call Eric to defend us and getting sued. And so it was more from the compliance contract side that most of my experience is. I tell my clients that if we end up in litigation, it's because I failed somehow. Mm-hmm. So I call it preventative. I'm on the preventative side. So
I think both approaches are extremely important and extremely valuable. It's interesting that you came from like a direct sales group. This is something that I've seen, and Eric, I don't know if you have any examples of this, but when you have these door-to-door reps where the calls are not recorded, oftentimes that accountability looks very, very different than when you've got a recorded phone call that is in a database somewhere. And a lot of these direct sales companies are looking to implement some sort of outreach strategy beyond just the doors. This is very, very common in Utah. There are a lot of direct sales companies in Utah, and they national brands, right? And so oftentimes there have been times where we've had to engage with these companies, these direct sales companies, on their leads that they're generating through a web form in their whatever software that they're using to be able to outreach these direct sale generated leads. And it's an interesting thing to be a part of. It's kind of where your specialties meet to see how you can manage risk and also make sure that you're compliant in the way that you're generating these.
Yeah, and the recorded calls are, it's a two-edged sword,
right?
Right, where you can get consent and you have proof of consent, but then on that same call, was there some other law violated, consumer protection law, misrepresentation and all kinds of things. So it's kind of that double-edged sword of, do we want those calls recorded? Do we not want those calls recorded? Yeah. Can they make more problems than they're worth? So it's always an interesting balance.
Yeah, the candidacy cases are interesting. And, as Rich was alluding to, they're very difficult to prove from the plaintiff side, especially if it's going to be a class action, right? Like, we defend these cases sometimes, and you got the door knocker out there, and they're like, I got the lady's consent. The lady says, no, you didn't. Okay. I mean, maybe the jury believes the guy, maybe the jury believes the lady, but guess what? How are you going to certify that as a class action? So that's actually, in my experience, it's a pretty safe practice from a TCPA perspective, oddly enough, just because it's very, very difficult to try to certify a case in that context. But where you've got, a large enough number, maybe they're willing to try that, try to crack that egg. It's pretty tough, though.
One area where we have seen some pretty crazy clawbacks is in solar, where something was misrepresented by an agent on the like a canvasser, and the deal was closed. We had a solar company that we worked with. They said they had over 10 million in clawbacks from their direct sales reps because they couldn't verify that the rep did or did not say something. Mm-hmm. And so I think it goes both ways. Like it's a really interesting place to play. And there's obviously, the scale is unlimited essentially, but yeah, it can definitely be tough to litigate.
And solar is an interesting area too, because it's the money involved. It's a lot larger sale than like an alarm sale or cable or internet or whatever, and it's a long sales cycle. So usually if there's misrepresentations or that kind of thing, those things usually will come out before an installation is done. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you'd think that a long sales cycle would keep agents kind of in line to do it by the book, because they know that if they did anything, if they skipped any steps, it's going to come out before they get paid. Right. But it's a tricky.
This company was looking for like an accountability vehicle, a way to hold reps accountable and to know what was happening, because it ended up being a little bit of a black box for them. Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Well, we've got some questions. So, Eric, if you don't mind, I've got a couple topics here that we'd love to talk through with you. So, first, over the years, you've established your firm as the go-to authority and earned the nickname TCPA Czar. So, talk a little bit about that branding and how you were able to kind of you talked a little bit about your background, but now it's evolved into a brand. I fly into the John Wayne Airport pretty frequently, and I see your name there. So talk to me a little bit about how it kind of transitioned from this career to a brand and to an advocacy group.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of kind of pieces to it. The Czar nickname it was given to me by a guy who was a very senior litigator, formerly at Pillsbury, and then he was at a firm called Dorsey and Whitney. So I was, as you could tell, I was fairly successful, fairly young in my career. I still think of myself as fairly young, although I'm getting old now for sure. And I was probably like 32, 33, and I had met with some success, and they made me the managing partner of the office there in Orange County for Dorsey and Whitney, which is it's an international law firm. And there had been guys that had been there for a lot longer than me, 20 years or so. And there was a little bit of consternation that this young guy was going to come in and like head the office. And so one of the senior guys, he was like, look, I'm going to back you up all the way. And so he used to call me the Czar, right? And he would do it in front of everybody else, all the other partners, all the other lawyers. So they knew, like, hey, here's the most senior guy there calling Troutman the Czar, so that everybody understood, like, you're not going to mess around. This guy is in charge of the office, right? And I really liked it. At first, when he started calling me that, I was like, oh, man, knock it off. But, like, I kind of understood where he was coming from. And so as I, progressed in my career, it started just kind of following me around a little bit. And then a couple of years later, I was like, you know what? When I launched TCPA World, I'm like, I'm going to lean into this, because that word, the czar, it's got some kind of like very visceral impact. You might not like it when you first hear it, but you're going to remember it. And that is something that all of you that do marketing, branding, and advertising, man, you got to get mind share. That's step one, man. You get your foot in that door. And even if it's a negative first impression, hopefully it's not, but even if it is, it's an impression and it sticks. And the first time you hear the czar, you're like, oh, what a tool. The second time, you're like, oh, there's that guy again. The third time, the fifth time, the sixth time. By the time you get to the 15th or 16th impression, you're like, this guy knows what the hell he's talking about, right? Because at the end of the day, I do, right? If I didn't, it wouldn't work, right? But ultimately, the more times you get exposed to my content, the more likely it is that you're going to recognize that, no, man, like, I don't speak unless it's one, from the heart, and two, if it's well-founded. And that's how it is. So that's where the czar kind of started developing. Obviously we leaned into it. We had some fun. We've got other members of the team who have other nicknames. We've got Queenie, of course, Pooja, my partner. We've got the Baroness, the Countess, and people enjoy it. Like, people really kind of understand that although we take the practice of law very seriously, we try not to take ourselves too seriously. And so we have these kind of like aggrandized, and yet they're kind of self-defeating names, right? And so it's kind of fun.
That's fun. I like that. That's cool.
It builds a fun brand too.
Yeah, I was going to say, it for sure does. I feel like I need a nickname. We need to workshop this. I need something. I like that. Well, let's jump into the meat and potatoes. So, Eric, as you know, most of the people who are viewing our content and engaging with our content are people who are concerned about consumer direct marketing and the trends and the risks and how to really improve their processes internally. And one of the highest risks, like every year when we do our SWOT analysis of what we're concerned about and what our objectives are, the number one threat for a lot of these consumer direct companies is TCPA risk. Yeah. It's a threat. And it's something that companies have quite literally shuttered their doors over. They've closed shop. And so as you look at the lay of the land right now, when you look at the major risks that companies are not taking into account, these consumer direct marketing companies, what do you view to be currently the major risks that companies are failing to really monitor?
Well, hopefully they're monitoring, right? Because the thing with the TCPA is that it's so complex and fast moving, and the stakes are so high that you can be fully aware of the TCPA and even kind of like conceptually tracking it, and yet it still crushes you because of how nuanced it is, right? So the TCPA is always, in my opinion at least, going to be the biggest risk for any consumer direct company. If you're making outbound calls or texts to consumers, like, hello, big flashing red lights, right? The TCPA, that is the federal statute that governs. And then the state law, right? The mini TCPAs are the other laws that are going to be governing, like, front and center what you're doing. And just like in any other heavily regulated industry, right? If you are making calls and text messages to consumers to try to sell stuff, this is the law you must comply with, kind of period, full stop. So I think, at least for most businesses, the risk is less like we just didn't know about the TCPA. The risk is we didn't know how the TCPA applied to us. And usually it's like use case specific. What I find is that businesses might have 6 or 7 different channels or maybe funnels or maybe outreach mechanisms, and they've got like 4 or 5 of them pinned down pretty good. Like, they get it. And then all of a sudden, just one of them is just like, wham. They just did not know that you couldn't, I see it in B2B all the time. Like, we didn't know that you couldn't just do outreach to cell phones for B2B purposes. I know this is more B2C, but it's like there's just like this hole in their game. So just kind of talking through it at a high level, right? Where do we see a lot of problems? Well, aged leads. I don't know why it is that folks just struggle with aged leads, but aged leads, if you're buying aged data, like you are buying a tremendous amount of risk. And that's true not just because, hey, anytime you're buying a third party lead, there's risk, right? We don't know who these guys are. Is this a real lead? Did a real person even fill out this form? Or was this some click center, call center agent somewhere in the Philippines filling it out for the consumer? Is it just straight fraud? Is it just bot traffic, right? But all of that's inherent anytime you're buying a lead. But then you buy an aged lead, and now you're going to throw on top of those other complications. You've got the risk that this has been revoked because the guy said, stop flipping calling me, and told the lead supplier, don't you sell my lead again. And they did it anyway because they do these things. And most importantly, you've got the risk that the lead has changed hands. The phone number's changed hands. It's not even Bob Jones's phone number anymore. Now it's Mark Smith's phone number. And you call Mark Smith and he sues you. And guess what? You're on the hook because it's a strict liability statute. So to me, failing to use the reassigned number database, failing to recognize that aged leads can become very problematic for people is something that a lot of companies just, for whatever reason, they don't see that coming. The other place where, I just see a tremendous number of these cases is, you're deploying an SMS strategy and you're not honoring opt-outs, right? Oh, sure, you're going to honor stop, perfect stop, STOP capitalized, right? But, following the April rulings from the FCC, that's not nearly good enough. Like, you can't just honor stop, quit, unsubscribe, end. Even if you do a perfect job on all of those, guess what? If the consumer says, leave me the hell alone, I don't want to hear from you anymore, knock it off. All of those are efficient and sufficient revocations of consent. You have to put those people on your D&C list if the message was marketing. And many businesses are just not doing this. And they're getting rung up, right? Because they're still stuck in the perfect stop model. And man, that day and age is gone. And so if you are doing SMS channel communication, good for you. It's a great tool. It's a great technique, but you've got to be honoring those stops. So there's just two of the things I've seen lately, but there's a ton of tricks and traps out there for TCPA. That's what makes this the most dangerous statute in America.
Yeah, I like what you said about the revocation rules, and something that I've seen too is the interpretation of SMS opt-out and how it relates to calling that record.
Absolutely. And that's going to be a really big deal next year, right? Because there's yet another layer of that FCC rule that's set to go into effect April 2026. That's going to be a multi-channel opt-out, right? So anytime a consumer says stop to a text, for instance, you've got to stop not just text, but also voice channel communications, and not just for the same purpose, but for any purpose that requires the same level of consent or greater. Wild, absolutely wild.
Yeah, and so what I would say to any consumer direct marketing group who either who's either omni-channel or multi-channel or utilizes a partner like Squeeze, make sure that you have integration set up between your different systems to ensure that those revocations are honored. And not that they're honored in 10 days, but that they're honored as quickly as possible to give your team time to process all of it. Because that is coming down the pipe, and it's something that will be a point of very high risk.
Yeah. One point that Eric kind of talked about is the blind spots or a hole in their game. I see that a lot with clients where a lot of it is just a lack of understanding of the TCPA. Like, I still have clients that still don't realize that the same rules for phone calls apply to text messages. Like, that they don't realize that, we're not telemarketing. And it's like, well, but you're sending all these texts out to drum up business. Like, that's a telemarketing campaign. But in their mind, it is not. Like, it doesn't trigger this reaction of like, oh, we need to run this through our compliance team, or they just don't even think about it because they don't realize that that's part of the law. The other area that I see where people just kind of have a hole in their game is they say, well, we're not telemarketing because we have consent. And so they view telemarketing as only outbound cold calling, right? Or they're like, oh, we have an existing business relationship, we're not telemarketing. It's like, right, you're still telemarketing, but you're calling subject to some type of an exception, but those rules are still in effect. You have to make sure that all of those campaigns, you've got some type of legal basis to get you past some type of a do not call list or, opt out or whatever. Like, you have to analyze every single campaign separately. And a lot of companies still don't, I think the vocabulary still trips up some companies where they think, oh, well, I'm not telemarketing. And so they don't even think to run it through the analysis, and people still get hung up on that.
The same thing with robocall, right? I'm not robocalling. I'm making a targeted call based upon some criteria that I have or because I have consent. Well, if you're using regulated technology, right, the TCPA applies to you, whether this is targeted or consented or otherwise. So you've got to make sure you're following all these ticky-tack rules. We haven't even talked about the caller ID requirements. We haven't talked about the quiet hour restrictions, right? There's just this avalanche of these ticky-tack things. And, again, just to say it again, I have found repeatedly, it sounds like Rich has too, many people come in, they're pretty educated. They've got it 85% right. But that 15%, that's what cooks you.
Yeah. And another area that I've seen hiccups, and I'd be curious to get Eric's take on this too, is in the contracts when they're first setting up in a relationship, like with a squeeze or a third party. In the contract, it'll say that it is on the end seller, right, whose customers these are, to provide the consent, right? And they say it's on them to provide consent.
Or records that are permissible to dial.
Right. But then what happens is that then that third party loads them in an ATDS to call them. They had consent, but then they didn't have prior express written consent. And now there's this disconnect where the call floor is using an ATDS and they needed a higher level of consent. These guys are saying, well, in the contract, it just said we'd give you consent, which we did. We didn't give you prior express written consent. The contract didn't say that. And now we've got to fight over, well, who's responsible for this liability? You told us you had consent. We told you we had this level of consent, but we didn't say anything about that level of consent. It's like those conversations need to be very clear on an operations level to make sure that whatever consent is here is what is actually calling, and we actually have this level of consent, because people get tripped up on that all the time because they don't know the difference, or they aren't sophisticated enough to realize there's nuance here as far as the level of consent we're actually providing to you. So have you seen any of that, Eric, where there's a disconnect between
happens all the time,
the seller and the party?
Like this is the wonkiest business industry. Like consumer direct marketing is like the only place in America where you have to have lawyers involved at like every level, right? Like I talk to clients all the time and it's like, man, you're more than a lawyer. You're like a strategic business advisor. Like I can't do anything without you. And I'm like, yeah, I know it's weird because it's just the law is so nuanced and specific here that exactly what you're saying, right? You would need a lawyer at the BPO who's leveraging the ATDS to say, hey, we have to have this level of consent. So make sure we get that representation. You have to have the lawyer at the seller who's like, hey, we only have this level of consent. So make sure that we're not overstating it, right? And then when they get together, like the lawyers have to be on the phone to make sure that they're communicating clearly with each other. Because if you just say consent, you're right, man. What the hell does that mean? There's different levels of consent that are needed for different kinds of campaigns, and who's got the risk, right? It matters. Who's got the indemnity obligation matters, but ultimately both sides just don't want to create any risk to begin with, right? They don't want to violate the law. But if they don't have the lawyers communicating with each other, this stuff is not intuitive, right? What seems like a consent to one person is not going to be a consent to somebody else. It's not going to be what the law requires. It just is what it is, man. You got to have lawyers in there.
Well, and just one little plug here, and Eric, you'll probably appreciate this because in this area, not all lawyers are created equal. Like I had a new boss come in at one of the companies I was working for, and he was interviewing the whole team to kind of see what does everyone do. And he's like, well, tell me what you do. And I started talking about TCPA compliance, and I mean, every lead provider, every campaign, and about after 60 seconds, he kind of like, his eyes kind of gloss over. He's like, hey, I don't know anything about this area. I really don't want to. Just keep doing what you're doing. And he's like, yeah, you're done. Like not every lawyer, like if you just go down the street to find the law firm on the corner, like they're not going to have the level of expertise in TCPA. It is a specialized,
it's a niche. Yeah.
That you just can't expect anyone. Oh, they do our commercial contracts. Well, they probably aren't versed in TCPA compliance, and I would get someone who actually understands the law.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, and it's so heavily regulated and so high risk. But there's also so much opportunity. Once again, the scale there and the ability to market is so important. And really, a lot of our industry, a lot of the financial health of the country is powered by consumer direct marketing groups. The major mortgage providers and originators are consumer direct groups. And so, it's absolutely essential. And now we're at a really interesting time in consumer direct marketing. The advent of AI and outbound AI agents. It's a bit of the Wild West. I've seen in my time, I've been in this space for about 10 years. And, the first adopters to really build systems and technology to adapt to TCPA regulation was like the financial services industry. And then about 5 years later, I started seeing some of the home service companies start to adopt some of these systems. A lot of them had that kind of retail model where they have their corporate, headquarters and then 50 shops around the country, and each shop had their own way of doing things, and they were calling leads on their cell phones, and they had run these shops or these stores for 20 years, and that was their way of doing things. And now we've seen them start to get on board. But now there's a new Wild West, and it's really my friend Mike Peranto has this series on LinkedIn that I really like, and he talks about the Wild West. And now we have these AI agents that companies are starting to employ, and they're rampant and they're everywhere. And there's a real lack of understanding of what is okay and what isn't okay. So, Eric, what are you seeing in the world of AI outbound dialing and the compliance parts that have not yet been litigated, but I'm sure soon will?
Yeah, I mean, it's all the way horrifying if you just stop and think about it. And I'll set aside like the risk of human destruction at the hands of these AI agents that are already targeting people that are trying to shut them off and stuff, because it's just horrifying. But we'll leave that alone. It's interesting because it feels like the Wild West, but it's kind of not the Wild West. Meaning there are laws in place that govern the use of this technology. They're just kind of being ignored currently, and that's not going to go well, right? Just trust me when I say that people who are early adopters of AI in the outbound B2C channels here, but aren't trying to follow the law, you're going to get cooked. It's just a matter of time. It always makes me laugh when I see stuff on LinkedIn, usually by people who are offering AI solutions, who are saying, if you're not using AI, you're going to get destroyed. And I'm thinking, especially in the law and other areas, if you are using AI, you're going to get destroyed because they haven't figured out how to do it legally yet. And if you do it illegally, it's just like when you started doing robocalls illegally, or you started doing RVM, right? Oops, that was wrong. There's a 4-year statute of limitations. You're going to get cooked, right? So what I say to anybody that wants to deploy AI and the voice channel, and anyone else, especially like the agentic stuff, slow down, time out, stop, okay? Time out. We don't need to rush to market just because you see somebody else doing it. Like those guys are going to trip, fall, and eat it, and they're going to have a face full of blood. Best case scenario for them. Okay, you want to go slow. You want to be very, very thoughtful here. When you're talking about outbound voice, right? Understand right out of the gate that is going to be treated as a robocall. I don't care if there's back and forth interaction, right? You're talking about generative AI. That's a pre-recorded artificial voice. You've got to have the right level of consent. Otherwise, you're done, right? You can't just take your CRM with your 100,000 records and let your little agent start calling people and talking to them. Now, in the SMS channel, you're going to have a lot more leeway. But this definition of ATDS, right, you heard Rich telling you, like, this is very beyond the ability of most people to figure out and understand. And if your system has latent capabilities that trigger the ROS&G, that trigger the TCPA's definition, and it probably does, you're using an auto dialer to send text messages. And again, you're like, what? I'm using AI. This isn't an auto dialer. It's generative. No, it's probably an auto dialer, which means you've got to have that heightened level of consent, right, that we talked about earlier. And we're not even talking about agentic stuff where they're like going in and filling out forms for the consumer. What forms are these guys filling out with this AI, right? Is this going to be binding if a consumer is vaguely aware that this agent is filling out a web form and then submitting it? Are you going to treat that as consent, right? So as you start buying leads from third parties who are using agentic models, you got to be asking yourself, wait a second, where is this really coming from? And that's setting aside the new disclosure rules that are working their way through Congress and through the state level. Like, there's a whole host of really fascinating legal issues. And I know I'm going to sound like a stick in the mud, but I'm going to suggest to you that you probably don't want to be a first mover here. You don't want to be an early adopter unless you really have mastered the legal underpinnings. Because if you haven't, just believe me, whatever little gains you have now, you're going to lose later plus 1,000-fold probably.
Yeah, and to that point, you remember when ATDS and the definition of an ATDS, what constitutes an ATDS, like while the courts were grappling with that.
Maybe just for people, ATDS is like an automated dialing
telephone
system.
dialing system, yep. ATDS, and that's the level, that's the technology you're using to call these leads, and it requires a higher level of consent than just saying, hey, yes, call me, right? That's consent, but that's not prior express written consent, which is on the websites that you look at when you're submitting a form where it says, by clicking the box below, I'm giving squeeze consent to call me using automated technology for marketing purposes. I understand this consent is not required to make a purchase, right? Like that's the higher level of consent. It's a lot harder to get a customer to click on that and give that consent. And so, but what we saw with that is we had a lot of courts grappling with, well, what constitutes an ATDS because of human interaction and this and it was a scatter plot across the country of, well, this court says this and that court says that, but that's not binding authority. So they can actually, so that this circuit has a different interpretation than that circuit. And then do you want to be that company that's on the bad side of some strange court opinion because they're all grappling with the issue for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so I tell people all the time from a practical standpoint, when you're trying to stay out of the courtroom, even if you feel really strong that you've got a winning position, that doesn't mean that you haven't paid Eric Troutman a lot of money to defend that position, and maybe even multiple levels where you have to appeal that decision and then appeal that decision or whatever. There's a time and a place for that. And if you're that company that, has those resources that you feel morally obligated to be the first one to stick their toe in the water, great, have at it. But it is one of those things, I think it needs to be a strategic decision. It can't be just willy-nilly, hey, I'm just going to do this because I need to do this to get more leads or.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really, really, really important and so much to take into consideration, which is why when you're looking to undertake these sorts of things, utilizing experts or third-party services that have their ducks in a row is extremely important, and looking for expert legal counsel to make sure that the decisions you're making are sound and will keep you out of the courtroom. Nothing is more costly than one of those. So those are things that you need to take into account.
Well, there is one thing more costly. It's losing in court.
Good point. Yeah.
When you're paying the defense fees and still losing.
That's
the worst.
That's not a good place to be. Good point. Well, my last question, I know we're running short on time here. When you look at the world of TCPA, it has been fast moving for the last, I would say 3-4 years, probably more. Where do you see it moving to in the next 3 to 4 years? What do you think will be different when we look back in 4 years compared to where we're at today?
I think we will be surprised by the sameness of it, meaning that it'll continue to be an incredibly robustly litigated area of law with traps for the unwary everywhere you look and extremely high exposure, right? That's how it's been for 10 years since I've been litigating. Actually, Jesus, it's been 15 years since I've been doing nothing but TCPA work now. And throughout that time frame, this has always been one of the fastest moving areas of law because there's so much money in it, right? For the plaintiff's lawyers, so they bring so many cases and, scattershot rulings come out and you have to track every single one to try to plot a data map to figure out where, you might land with your specific use case. It's like a constellation of possibilities. But as we look into the future, right, when you're talking about trying to track a weather pattern, right, with 10 million data points like we have in TCPA, it's very, very challenging to know where we're going to land. What we do know is that people don't like robocalls, right? Especially not unconsented robocalls. And so if the robocall index from UMail continues to spike like it has for the last year, we can fully expect Congress, which is otherwise dysfunctional, to continue to do things that are anti-quote-unquote robocall, and the states to come forward and do things that are anti-quote-unquote robocall. So as we move into the future, if the trajectory is there's a lot of unwanted robocalls out there, we can expect there to be more regulation, more restrictions, and a much tighter environment for people doing direct-to-consumer marketing. If, on the other hand, companies, say, got together and created a self-regulating organization like, I don't know, REACH, Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment, and people actually join the organization, actually take it seriously and treat consumers right and make less robocalls and only those that consumers actually want to receive because they actually really did sign up and understood they were going to receive these calls, then I think, honestly, there might be a brighter future where there is actually a lot less restriction. Maybe, the current rules aren't going anywhere, but maybe we can avoid worse rules that come down, right? And maybe we can see an environment where AI deployment might be acceptable because consumers are expecting this sort of thing because they're educated and there's transparent disclosures around it. So from a certain perspective, I think we're going to continue to see what we see today, which are rules that restrict auto dialing, rules that restrict DNC calls. But we might not get into a worse environment if folks in the industry work together, act responsibly. We might live in a world that's more static than we've seen it be, which would be a very good thing for everyone if we could actually pinpoint some rules and learn to live within them.
And adhere to them to create a better customer experience.
And I would, just to piggyback off of that, is something that a Better Business Bureau director gave me this insight, and I'll pass it along, is that complaints are your friend because it tells you where you need to improve as a company. And so if, when looking at these new technologies, employing these new technologies in different campaigns, I would strongly advise you not to just kind of fix it and forget it type of thing. Like put the campaign in motion and, hope, cross your fingers. Like you should have something in place that's some type of feedback loop where you're getting data on how many customers are complaining about this, how many people are opting out, how many people are yelling at agents over it. Like if you turn on a new technology or a new campaign and it's relatively quiet and it's converting well and you seem to be delivering something that consumers are responding to, you can feel pretty comfortable with that, right? If you turn it on and there's like a huge number of do not call requests and there's a huge number of escalations and people that want to talk to managers and people that shut it off, right? Like whether you feel like you're within the confines of the law or not, shut it off. Like there will be a reckoning to come if you just tick people off. Like that's when people go to their congressman. That's when people escalate. That's when they go get plaintiff's counsel. That's when they go, like, if you're ticking people off, shut it down.
I think that's a really, really good point. And we have at Squeeze, we have this thing we say, we'll know within 2 hours of launching a campaign if the campaign's a winner or not.
Yeah.
Because customer sentiment is the number one measure of that. Yeah. Refusal rates, opt-out rates, bad lead rates, all of those things. If there's a high bad lead rate, we question where the data is coming from and if the attestations are actually true. Yep. If there's poor customer sentiment, we wonder if the offer page that they opted into was gray or bad or co-registered or all of these different things. And if the DNC rate is extremely high as well, we wonder who else has been getting these records and why have they been harassed by calls when I'm told that I'm the only one that received this record.
Or they're saying, you guys have called me 3 times today.
No, I've actually not. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really, really good point. Awesome. Eric, any other points on that or
no, man, great
things
observations.
to touch on there?
I love this discussion. It's a lot of fun. I'm glad we're doing this.
Perfect. Well, we really, really appreciate the time that you have spent helping within this space. You've obviously been a very influential in TCPA and the advocacy as well. You mentioned just briefly in that last response, REACH. Could you talk a little bit about REACH and how that started and how companies can take advantage of that?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned kind of earlier, I cut my teeth representing the big major banks, primarily on their servicing arm, actually, less on their marketing arm. Slowly, as time went on, I started working more with the marketing side, and I discovered this thing called lead generation that, as far as I knew, was basically just like code for selling consumer data to my clients to get my clients sued. because they kept getting sued in class actions. And every time I look into it, it was because they bought a lead from somebody. So I started going to these conferences where the leads cons and lead generation world to figure this out, because I just want to know, like, who are you guys? And before I knew it, I realized, like, holy moly, this is like an entire industry of folks that are contributing, I say this with love, to the robocall problem, right? Because many times they are trying to reduce friction in the funnel to the degree that they're just tricking consumers into providing information and clicking buttons, and they don't know really what they're doing. And then this consumer data is getting sold over and over into aggregators and to different networks and repeatedly. And then there's an aged lead model. And you fill out one form, as you guys know, I mean, you might get your data sold to 100 companies over time. That's crazy. To me, that's crazy. And it's not what consumers were expecting. And this is why the regulators were pretty pissed off, I think, with this industry and the folks that were buying leads. Telemarketers sometimes get a bad rap deservedly, but many times they get a bad rap because they're buying leads and they actually think that this consumer wanted to hear from them and they didn't. So I started Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment really as a lead buyer organization to get the big companies that were buying leads to say, we're not buying leads anymore unless they meet certain standards, because we're tired of getting sued and we're tired of the brand damage that comes with people thinking that we're harassing our customers or near customers, when that's not what we want to do. We just want to call somebody that filled out a form. That's what we're paying for, right? And so it's been very, very well received. Many lead generators have come in. There's a set of standards that have been adopted that are designed to assure transparency for consumers and to stop unwanted robocalls, right? Which is really what everybody needs. Everybody wants this. It'll help. If this is adopted widely, it'll stop the unwanted calls. It'll stop the unwanted regulation. And guess what? People will start picking up their phones again, which is a very good thing. So anyway, it's called Reach, reachmbc.com. It's a mutual benefit corporation. Reachmbc.com is your website. It is a tax deductible. It's a 401c3 organization. So feel free to join. It's a great outfit. And as you alluded to, we do a lot of advocacy to the FCC and to other regulators. They like us. We're the good guys, right? Like, we have high standards. We hold ourselves to high standards. We're transparent in terms of what we're trying to do with consumers. We liaise quite frequently with the regulators. They're big followers of my blog, right? We have a good relationship. So you'll notice the guys that are getting crushed out there, both in litigation and by the regulators, none of them are Reach members. Now, obviously, I'm not guaranteeing if you join Reach, you won't get sued or anything. But my point is, if you follow high standards, you're not low-hanging fruit, you're not really bad guys, chances are you're going to do pretty well out there, even in the dangerous TCPA world.
And just kind of on the lead gen side of things, like what call centers or third-party dialers don't understand all the time, they're afraid of losing volume, right? Well, if we impose this, our lead count is going to go down dramatically. What they don't always account for when they're making the argument to legal as to why they still should turn on the campaign is that the conversion rate, because we're taking out all the garbage, the conversion rate on those accounts is going to go up dramatically. Yep. And so sometimes people are like, well, if we do that, we'll lose half our leads. It's like, great.
Yeah.
And your conversion rate will double or triple.
Right.
So part of that is just, people get nervous about it because they don't know it. But we want, like what Eric was saying, everyone wants that. Like, no one wants to be calling numbers for people that don't want the call. Yeah. Right? It makes it harder for everyone.
Well, and I could spend an hour talking about what a poor contact cadence and contact strategy does for a consumer's propensity to transact on the other end, and the brand abrasion and the brand experience that they're having. The truth is, when done the right way, this turns into a competitive advantage and something that sets you apart. That sales experience will create a lead that is more prone to transact with your company and provide lifetime value.
Yep.
And I think by doing those things, you could extrapolate that principle to your business and say, by following these principles and by being on the right side of things and being above board with the standards that you're following, you are positioning yourself to grow and to do it in a way that is correct, that is that is risk averse and able to scale.
Yeah, and much more sustainable.
Absolutely.
There it is.
Well, this has been great, Eric. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. We've really enjoyed talking about this. And Rich, as always, it's great. We love your expertise and all of the value that you bring to the Squeeze team. So
Glad I could be here.
We really appreciate both of you and look forward to seeing you at the next show, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you. This has been the Juice Consumer Direct podcast. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them below. Send them in. We'd love to get to them. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.